My parents sent me to prison after my brother stole and crashed my car. We can't let your brother's life be ruined, they insisted. Swa told the police everything. Now both my brother and father are locked up. Under the icy December night sky, I stared at the sight of my beloved SUV crashing into a telephone pole. Snow began to cover the car's body, and the chrome decorations glistened coldly like ice. This scene seemed to foreshadow the impending collapse of our family. However, to tell this story, I must start from much earlier, for the distortions within our family began long ago. My name is Kristen Carlson. This story might seem to revolve around a dispute over a car on the surface. In reality, however, it is a record of the long-standing distortions in my family erupting all at once. The car was merely a symbol. The events surrounding it mercilessly brought to light the truths we did not want to see. Within what appeared to be a peaceful family, everyone's grievances, secrets and scars overflowed from that night onward. Looking back, that night was a turning point for our family. In my family, there was an unspoken but recognized hierarchy, and at its pinnacle stood my brother, Jonathan. From birth, Jonathan received all our parents' affection. His arrival was a miracle for my parents, who had struggled with infertility. However, when I was born unexpectedly a year later, the joy of my parents was not as profound as it had been, as my grandmother later confided to me. "Your mother wanted a boy," she said. "After Jonathan was born, her wish was fulfilled. You were an unexpected gift." This unexpected gift continued to be treated as an extra. Everything Jonathan wanted was given to him. His failures were forgiven, and even his violent actions were dismissed with a laugh, because boys will be boys. Issues related to Jonathan in our family were always swept under the rug for special reasons, but if I did the same, I was immediately scolded. One of my earliest memories is of a doll I received on my 5th birthday. I vividly remember the day Jonathan broke the doll that I had cherished and displayed. "Your brother was just curious," my mother said, dismissing my tears. "It's your fault for not taking care of your things." Such unreasonable situations were my daily reality. My possessions were also Jonathan's. My books, my toys, my time, all were taken away under the pretext of for my brother's sake. Yet, as a child, I wanted to believe that my family loved me. Otherwise, the daily reality was simply too sad. Even at school, I could not escape Jonathan's influence. He was athletic and popular, while I was a quiet student who often spent time in the library. I felt as if I had no place anywhere. But the quiet library was my sanctuary. However, I always maintained top grades. Perhaps that was a desperate attempt to be recognized. I hoped that by being special in some way, my family would finally see me. "Kristen, why can't you be like your brother?" my father often said. "Jonathan is proactive. Everyone likes him. But you." His words trailed off, but the meaning was clear. No matter how hard I tried, Jonathan's shadow never faded. Our parents treated such situations as if they were the norm. "Because he's your brother. Because we're family." These words constantly suppressed my feelings. It was considered the norm in our family, and nobody questioned it. No matter how much I internally resisted, the atmosphere that did not allow me to raise my voice was ever present. And gradually, I realized that in this family, I was just existing. On my 18th birthday, I left home carrying only a small bag. I left the house before dawn, and strangely, I felt a sense of relief. When I gently closed the door of the house, I felt as if I had been released from the overwhelming pressure that had crushed me. I didn't look back, only walked forward. From somewhere in the distance, the sound of birds chirping could be heard, and as the faint light began to illuminate the sky, a realization quietly surged within me that I was starting a new life. The one who welcomed me was my paternal uncle, Douglas. I had vague memories of meeting him when I was young, but since then, there had been little interaction. Nonetheless, as a former police officer, he had long been concerned about my family's situation. This goes back to the time when my family visited Uncle Douglas's house when I was a child. By chance, Uncle Douglas overheard my parents praising Jonathan while dismissing me. "Kristen is a bit too introverted, isn't she? Can't she be more outgoing like Jonathan?" my father said. To which my mother laughed and replied, "Well, she's a girl, so maybe that can't be helped." Although Uncle Douglas didn't pursue the matter deeply at the time, he occasionally checked on me afterward. Sometimes he would call and ask, "Is Kristen all right?" But my parents would lightly dismiss it, saying, "Oh, she's all fine." His concern turned into conviction when I appeared on the list of top students published by my middle school. Uncle Douglas happened to see it and wanted to praise my efforts, but he was faced with my parents' cold response when he contacted them. "Kristen's grades are good, but, more importantly, Jonathan is doing well in his new sports team," they said, changing the subject. At that moment, Uncle Douglas realized how I was being treated within the family. Ever since then, Uncle Douglas had secretly resolved to always extend a helping hand whenever I reached out for help. When I reached out to him at the age of 18, he welcomed me without hesitation. His home was filled with a calm atmosphere I had never experienced before. The walls were adorned with photographs he had taken during his active days, and the bookshelves were lined with police-related books and magazines about his hobby, fishing. Everything seemed to reflect his personality, and each detail felt fresh to me. "Here, you can be yourself," Uncle Douglas told me, providing me with a small room. Though modest, the room was furnished with warm wooden furniture and soft curtains, creating a comforting space. That night I cried tears of joy for having my own space for the first time. I buried my head in the pillow, unable to contain the emotions I had been holding back. Uncle Douglas gave me his SUV, which he had used during his time as a police officer. It wasn't in perfect condition, but the engine was robust, and the interior was well maintained. "I have a special attachment to this car," he said softly, caressing the hood. "Kristen, I believe you will take good care of it." The car became more than just a means of transportation for me. It symbolized freedom and independence, a testament to my new life. Every time I drove, I felt like I was stepping into a broader world. The feel of the steering wheel, the vibrations from pressing the accelerator, all of it reminded me that I was alive. Polishing the car before going to work became my daily ritual, almost like meditation. As I wiped the body with a cloth, I felt my mind gradually aligning itself. The sound of the engine starting seemed like a heartbeat filled with hope. I vividly remember the coldness of the wind and the sense of freedom when I first drove the car through the city. Life with Uncle Douglas gradually healed my spirit. During dinner times, we would laugh over stories from his days as a police officer and his fishing trips. Those peaceful moments became incredibly precious to me. I wasn't used to being loved, but Uncle Douglas was always on my side, respecting my existence. For the first time, I began to understand what it meant to be myself. The days spent in his home were shaping a new form of family for me. Family is determined by bonds, not blood. Uncle Douglas's words deeply resonated with me. Meanwhile, Jonathan's life was filled with turmoil. In high school, he was celebrated as a star athlete, but things did not go well for him after entering college. Initially, he received a scholarship and led a glamorous life as a member of the American football team. But his lack of focus on practice and indulgence in flashy play led to poor grades. Eventually, he was forced to drop out after 2 years. He drifted through various jobs afterward, none lasting long due to conflicts with supervisors or criticisms of his lack of responsibility. Jonathan always boasted, "I can do bigger things," but reality did not accept him. His irresponsibility manifested in his personal life too, causing problems with speeding and drunk driving, and leading to the destruction of 3 cars. The worst incident was when he completely wrecked the last car by crashing it into a telephone pole. After that, the insurance company refused to renew his contract, and he could no longer own a car. However, his obsession with cars remained. This fixation eventually led his gaze to my cherished SUV. On Christmas night, I was spending time with my family at my parents' house for the first time in a long while. The reason I visited my estranged family was a letter from my mother. As the year-end approached, she had sent a brief letter saying, "It would be nice if we could spend time together as a family." The content was simple, but I couldn't gauge the emotion behind it, and decided to attend after some hesitation. Perhaps I hadn't yet mustered the courage to completely cut ties with my family. Snow quietly continued to fall outside the window, enveloping the surroundings in a white silvery world. The living room was warm with the fireplace burning, and the table was set with roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, and green bean casserole, creating the appearance of a perfect family gathering. My mother carried a cake from the kitchen, and my father poured wine, both in high spirits, but I sat there feeling uneasy. Jonathan seemed to act as if nothing was wrong, but every time his gaze turned toward me, a sense of wariness spread through my heart. I had noticed his interest in the SUV long before. A few weeks before Christmas, we had accidentally reunited. One holiday, as I was having lunch at a cafe near Uncle Douglas's house, Jonathan suddenly appeared. It seemed that the apartment he was living in at the time was near Uncle Douglas's house, and he had spotted me by chance. "Kristen, you live around here." He sat down with a surprised look on his face. At first, I was cautious, but Jonathan started chatting in his usual lighthearted manner, asking about my life. It was then that I noticed his gaze shifting towards my SUV parked in the lot. "Hey, Kristen, is that car yours?" he pointed out, his eyes lighting up. "It was a gift from Uncle Douglas," I replied, and Jonathan nodded in admiration. "It's a nice car. It has a strong feel that I love. I'd like one like this someday, but it's just not possible right now," Jonathan said, his gaze hinting at something beyond mere curiosity. Even during our casual conversation, it became evident that he was fixated on it. This brief reunion made me aware of Jonathan's interest in my SUV. Perhaps that's why, on Christmas night, I had a lingering anxiety that he might target it. The incident occurred towards the end of the night. After the family had retired to their rooms, I was the only one left in the living room. As I stared into the fireplace, lost in thought, I suddenly realized that my car keys were missing. They were nowhere to be found in my bag. A sense of unease quickly turned into a foreboding feeling. I rushed to the window and saw that the space where the SUV had been parked was now empty. I felt the blood drain from my face. I hurriedly grabbed my phone and opened the tracking application Uncle Douglas had installed. The screen flashed with the indication that the car was moving several miles away. Jonathan had taken my car keys without me noticing and stolen my cherished SUV. I later learned that he needed the car to go to a party with friends. Why he would do such a thing, why he wouldn't even borrow a car from someone else, but instead use mine without permission, swirled through my mind. But before I could seek answers to these questions, the urge to retrieve the car overcame me, and as I had feared, under the influence of alcohol, Jonathan mishandled the car and crashed on the icy road. I took a taxi to the scene, where I found the SUV smashed against a telephone pole and Jonathan being led away by the police, still drunk. Seeing that sight tightened a knot in my chest. The car, handed down from Uncle Douglas, was precious to me. More importantly, it was a symbol of my freedom, and to see it destroyed in such a way was unbearable. However, what shocked me even more was the reaction of my parents. They had arrived at the scene before me, and were attempting to lie to the police officers, saying, "The car belongs to our daughter. She was driving. Our son was just caught up in it." The motive was clear. They were willing to sacrifice me to protect their son. "My daughter Kristen was driving," my mother explained shakily to the officer. "She got a bit panicked. We came to help her." At that moment, I felt as if my blood had turned to ice. The family distortion I had faintly sensed up until now was starkly evident. My parents had never really intended to protect me. Any slight hope I had for my family evaporated in that instant. Feeling a surge of anger building inside, I decided to call Uncle Douglas. He answered immediately, and upon hearing my situation, he said he would come right away. Knowing Uncle Douglas had connections with the police, I hoped that his arrival would help stabilize the situation. After a while, Uncle Douglas arrived at the scene. As a former police officer, he assessed the situation calmly and quickly spoke to the officers. One of the officers at the scene happened to be a former colleague of his. "I'm aware of what happened here. Jonathan was driving a stolen car," he began his testimony. Uncle Douglas's statement, surveillance footage from the scene, and the tracking records of my car all matched, clearly proving that Jonathan had stolen the car. Subsequently, the police conducted a more detailed investigation, and Jonathan was arrested for driving without a license and under the influence. His actions resulted in a suspension of his license for over a year, a fine of several $1,000s, and a criminal record. Then, the discussion about the car repair cost began in a more contentious atmosphere than anticipated. Under the fluorescent lights of the body shop, my father's face looked more severe than usual. Jonathan offered to pay all the repair costs. It must have been a significant decision for him. However, my parents objected to his decision. "There's no need for that," my mother said with a trembling voice. "We're family. We should share the burden." That statement cut through something inside me. Emotions I had suppressed for years overflowed like a dam bursting. "Enough is enough," I shouted. "Why do you always protect him? I had no choice but to leave home, to go to Uncle Douglas's house, all because of you guys. You're covering for him even after he stole my car, and you even tried to lie to the police. And now, when he's finally trying to take responsibility, you're still interfering. What's the family about this?" The shop fell silent. At that moment, a customer waiting for repairs muttered under his breath, "Oh, my goodness. Typical parents who hinder their child's growth." That comment snapped my father's restraint. He attacked the stranger, later identified as Michael Fisher, with unchecked aggression. My father's fists mercilessly struck Michael's face, slamming him against the wall. I was frozen with fear. The violent tendencies my father had shown at home were now exposed to the outside world. As the staff called the police, my father, in a panic, left my mother behind and fled. After being detained for several weeks, he was released. During his detention, he was ordered to undergo a mandatory anger management program. The program included cognitive behavioral therapy and group therapy, and it definitely changed my father's condition. Meanwhile, Jonathan also paid a heavy price. He faced a criminal record, paid hefty fines, and received a suspension of his driver's license for over a year. This series of experiences seemed to have a significant impact on him. He became like a different person, actively trying to mend our relationship. He reached out almost weekly, deeply reflecting on his past actions and repeatedly apologizing. However, his relationship with our father did not improve. Instead, the distance between them only grew. In particular, their shared criminal records seemed to push them further apart. The most shocking change was my mother's transformation. After the arrests of my brother and father, she became like a different person. Her attitude towards me became cold, and her anger intensified. She started to blame everything on me, and her words were piercing. If you had just lent him the car from the beginning, none of this would have happened. Kristen, you destroyed our family. Are you satisfied with ruining our reputation? Each of these accusations deeply wounded me. Finally, I decided to completely cut off my relationship with her. I no longer wanted to accept her hurtful words. My feelings for my mother cooled, and I crossed a line that could never be undone. My grandparents, who had heard the whole story from Uncle Douglas, reacted in a way no one expected. They made the severe decision to disinherit my parents. Those who should protect the family, but instead break it, do not deserve our trust or our estate, my grandfather stated, deeply hurting my parents' hearts. This decision fundamentally changed my parents' lives. Without the inheritance from my grandparents, my parents lost the financial comfort they had taken for granted. They had relied on the anticipated wealth and assets to sustain their lavish lifestyle. However, with that foundation gone, their lives were transformed. They were forced to give up their luxuries and adapt to a more modest lifestyle. Thus, my parents began to harshly feel the consequences of their past actions. Later, when my grandparents approached me about the inheritance, I took my time to consider it. Since money was one of the factors that broke my family, I want to thoroughly assess how I live my future. Jonathan and I now meet once a month, and knowing that he is sincerely working on his rehabilitation, I can see his growth. He participates in an alcohol dependency treatment program and has found stable employment. Seeing him commuting by bicycle is unimaginable from his once arrogant demeanor. I'm ashamed of my past self, he admits, accepting his mistakes and trying to move forward. Our relationship is slowly rebuilding at a gentle pace. Meanwhile, my father has also started to confront his emotions. He actively participates in anger management sessions, delving into the roots of his violent tendencies, gradually reflecting on his past actions, and showing signs of remorse. However, my relationship with my mother remains frozen. Sometimes I feel a desire to mend our relationship, but each time her words echo in my mind, and I choose to keep my distance. The scars from the past are not easily healed. Facing financial difficulties, my parents have had to significantly revise their previous lifestyle. My mother started a part-time job, and my father now takes extra shifts on weekends to supplement their income. It's painful to see them struggle, but at the same time, this experience seems to be teaching them humility. While keeping my distance, I continue to observe their changes. My mother has sent me emails apologizing, but I have not yet replied, nor am I in a hurry to do so. My father completed his anger management program and now participates in community volunteer activities on weekends. This was recommended by his counselor as a way to control his anger. His help in coaching sports for young people has completely erased his previously intimidating demeanor. His expression now shows a certain calmness and sense of responsibility, making him seem like a different person from before. The settlement with Mr. Fisher, who was a victim of my father's violence, has also been resolved. My parents continue to pay compensation, which has become a significant financial burden, but it seems to be a necessary atonement. While their efforts to fulfill their past responsibilities are commendable, regaining trust is not something that can happen immediately. The bonds of family can sometimes be a strong force that unites us, but can also be chains that bind us. However, I have learned that having the courage to break those chains can pave the way for a new future. Uncle Douglas taught me that people can change, but the process of changing is not always comfortable. It can be painful and often requires significant sacrifices. Knowing this, I want to live my life not to meet someone else's expectations, but for myself. I don't know what the landscape will look like this time next year.